tomorrow is the what corruption day?
It's the World
International Anti-Corruption Day, right?
Yes, December 9th.
December 9th. And this day is the day when, well, as we were told by Philip from the EACC the other day, many people from many countries across the world met in Mexico some 20 years ago.
Yes.
And they said, you know what, we are going to come up with a UN convention to fight corruption. And countries signed. Kenya was number one on the line, signed and ratified this and said, yes. And we said we're going to have institutions that fight corruption. And the journey then towards fighting corruption was institutionalized at the UN level and at the local level. Ahead of tomorrow's commemoration, we're going to have this conversation today with the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. Our guest this morning is Annette Wangia. She's at Senior Principal Prosecution Counsel in the DPP's office. Good morning, Annette.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well. Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Thank you.
Kenya's biggest conversation. As we look into tomorrow's day and the big event for tomorrow, there is a proverb that we always give our guests. City Muga is the one who gives the proverb. He stepped out for a meeting this morning, but the proverbs for this week have been from a country called Eritrea. I'm sure you've heard of it. Today's proverb says, dreamers remember their dreams when they are in trouble. Dreamers remember their dreams when they are in trouble. Annette, what's your interpretation of this proverb?
So, actually, I think I reflect on it as we have this conversation about anti-corruption. I think that it's very easy for us to go about our daily lives without thinking about the impact that what our actions do. And if we sleep, by the time we wake up and realize what we've done, it will be very late.
We'll be in trouble.
We'll be like, this is not where I intended to be as at this point. And so I think that we have to be conscious every day about the choices that we are making and where we want to go. What do we want to see for ourselves and for our children and for the future generations? So let's not be dreamers.
I get it. Yeah. So dream and then work towards actualizing that dream.
Absolutely.
If you lose vision of your dream, you will get into trouble, and then you'll remember, I
had a dream.
I had a dream that things would go this way.
Yeah.
You're ending up there because you dropped your dream.
Yeah, correct.
Be the guy who doles out points today.
That's a good one. Points. Out of 15.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Mm-hmm.
I think Annette gets 16.
Hey!
Overachiever already.
It's a good way to start our Friday.
Exceeding expectation.
Thank you very much.
Now, we know the DPP.
Yes.
But now, these other officers below, the Senior Principal Prosecution Counsel. What's that?
That's just a big name to say what we do. So how the office operates is that there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yes.
And the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is across the country. We're in all counties, all sub-counties. We appear in all the courts in Kenya. And because the DPP cannot appear in person, he has different officers, and we are of different ranks depending on, your years of experience, your... how long you stayed with the institution and so on.
Right.
And so it just means that I'm in the office to do what the DPP has sent us out to do, and that is to defend the rights of Kenyans. And so our work is to institute, basically to begin criminal proceedings, to carry them out all the way to the end. So from the time someone is presented to court on the first day to the very last day of sentencing, where we represent the victim's rights and say, this is what the victim is saying happened to them. This is the effect of what has happened to them, and we are asking the court to take these matters into consideration as it sentences.
Okay.
So that's our work.
Now, though, you've actually headed that direction. Let's stay there for a little bit, right? So we know the DPP, and then we also see the people who appear in court representing the ODPP.
Yes.
But those are not the only people who work on a case. So how is that structure? What departments do you have in the ODPP?
So Let me explain it in this way. What happens is that when a case has been reported, and let's talk about anti-corruption cases because that's our topic. When an anti-corruption case is reported, it's reported in different ways. So there might be anonymous reports, there might be news reports. You guys uncover, people in the media uncover happenings out there, and the investigative agencies, the EACC, the National Police Service, KRA, a number of institutions, they undertake investigations. Basically, they're like, okay, they compile a file and they forward it to us as the ODPP. They say, we think that we have enough evidence to sustain charges against an individual, and so that file is presented to us. And one of our most important decisions that we have to make is determining whether what has been brought to us is sufficient. Many times there's an inkling that something has happened, or you might even have some evidence that an offense has happened, but we don't quite have enough evidence. And so in those circumstances, what we do is that we send the file back to the investigative agency and say, you need to cover this and this area. So I'll give you an example. Let's talk about procurement offenses, which are very common anti-corruption offenses. A tender was issued to someone's brother or son or sister, and the documents that have been signed, and we are saying we want to charge this person. How do we know that the signature that appears on this document belongs to the person that we intend to charge? We say if that has not been done, we send that document back to the investigative agencies. They have document examiners who are experts in their own rights, and they get, we call them known signatures, which is, when you come into work, you sign in, we get that book. And we compare it with this document, this tender document. We are saying this, the document submitted with the tender, and we are saying, did you really sign this payment document that authorized money to leave government to go to an individual irregularly? And so once those areas have been covered, then the file is brought to us, and we say, okay, we make a determination. The evidence is enough. We can now go to court, and from there now we launch the case into court.
Typically, how long should it take before, when an investigative agency brings the file to the ODPP, how long do you have to review the file and respond to the investigating agency?
Now, we don't have rigid rules, only because, for instance, anti-corruption matters are quite complex. So sometimes we get files where we have 20,000 documents to review. So for those documents, you might get a little bit longer. You might get maybe 2 weeks. You might get a month. You might get 2 months because of the complexities that come up. But we try within a month of receiving of a file. It comes through to the DPP. The DPP notes it down to the various departments. And from that department, brief or a review is done, and we report back to the DPP and tell him this is what this file says. The DPP looks at that and he makes the decision. The ultimate decision comes from the DPP, whether this evidence is enough, whether it should go to court, and what happens. And so we send it back to the investigative agencies. They conduct the arrests and we go to court.
Okay. This is interesting because in this all of this is the processes that now we're talking about, the war on graft, and the processes that then actually make this war move from step to step, isn't it?
Yes.
And a lot of times, even as we read some of these things, we get involved in these cases on our side as media, on other people who then consume this information. We often ask ourselves, so what happens before, at the end of, because what you're saying is interesting, at the end of the day, we see a charge sheet in court. And all these processes that you talk about then go towards now, it culminates in this charge sheet. Confirmation of known signature, confirmation of identity, confirmation of a process through which somebody was actually at work here, all of those things. Then you now say, based on that, we can now level these charges, is it not?
Yes.
So then under what circumstances would a magistrate then say, again, as we've seen, to the ODPP that, no, this does not meet the threshold, or doesn't meet the evidentiary threshold, I would ask that you go back. Or, as again we've seen, the ODPP would say, actually, you know what? The evidence that we thought would have been enough to now level charges actually is not. What circumstances or scenarios would we be playing with here for those things to then be determined?
All right. There are various things that happen in the court process. So we do go to court, and I'll start at the beginning. Sometimes the magistrate at that very initial point might say, this charge sheet you brought to me, I don't like how it looks. For instance, you might find that we have brought a charge sheet with 30 counts, and we have 18 people. And the magistrate says, for you to prosecute these 18 people in the 30 counts, I don't like it. And so they'll send it back to us and say, I think you should look at this and see, should we split this just for ease of prosecution, for ease of handling the case? Now, when we go later on into trial, different things happen. Sometimes the witnesses who recorded those statements they're nowhere to be found. They go missing. A lot of people are government employees. They retire, and when they retire, they go home. They tell you, listen, I'm not coming. I'm no longer working in that organization, and I'm not going to come to testify.
So it's not that they go missing. It's that they are no longer willing to testify.
There's those who go missing.
Go missing means what?
You just cannot find them.
In this country.
So can you believe it? We go to your home. We start with, when you recorded your statement, you were living in, let's say, South Sea, in Nairobi. So we come to where you told us, because when you record your statement, you give us, basically details about where you live. We come there and we don't find it. First of all, we start with the employer. Employer says, oh, Eric retired. So then we go to your residence. Your residence, we can't find you. We check your phone numbers. That number is disconnected. Sometimes we even go to your village and they say, we haven't seen him. We haven't seen him for years. Some people, I think they say...
That is not... Listen, in this country of ours, if the police want you today and you're hiding in a cave, not in a cave, you've dug a hole inside
there's a bunker underground.
Yes. Umejificha ndani ya mbuyu, big baobab tree. You're in there, they will find you.
I'm not saying that it is impossible to be found, but people make it very difficult. Eric, you know of stories of people who disappeared from their homes and were not seen for 20 years. And so the agencies that we work with, they also have limitations. So when someone doesn't want to be found, they can make sure you don't find them. Now, the second one is where we talked about people who are unwilling. They don't want to come. We have means and ways through the courts. We issue court summons. Sometimes we issue warrants. And that means we'll send a police officer to your home and they'll bring you to court. But you can imagine the attitude of that person who's coming to court under a warrant of arrest. They were put at the back of a vehicle. They probably spent a night in the cells because they told you, I don't want to come. When they come to court, the value of the evidence they'll bring to you is not the same as someone who wakes up in the morning and says, I'd like to come and fight corruption. So when this person comes to court and they're testifying, it's completely different. Now, a third part is we have refractory witnesses. You have a statement. In fact, sometimes, not many times, we meet with the witnesses before. A week to a couple of days to the day they're due to testify, we meet with them. And I ask them, we'll ask them, so what happened? And they tell you, according to their statement, when they get to court, the testimony they give is completely different. You're sitting there wide-eyed. You're like, what are you saying?
So the magistrate then would ask you as ODPP, did you even meet this individual before? How can you bring this kind of thing to my court?
But you're killing your own case. It seems like, how did you bring someone who's going to testify evidence that's against the case that you're bringing. And for us, we are also shocked. And, many times people don't think that we prep. But we prep, But between the time you prepped and the time the witness appeared in court, something has happened. And by the time that evidence goes on record, it's over. It's over. So there are different things that happen in court. Sometimes even the documents, because by the time we're making the decision to charge, you're given documents and you're informed, okay, this and this is there. By the time you're coming to court, sometimes the documents are unavailable. Sometimes, someone just comes and says, I actually did not sign this document as your witness. And so you're like, what do I do? Sometimes we declare them hostile witnesses. But again, once you've declared your witness hostile,
that's it.
Your case is not going in the right direction.
So when you see that are you then forced, quote unquote, to sometimes pull a case based on things like this?
Absolutely.
Because then the public says, oh, for goodness sake, this ODPP is not serious about this war on graft, because we see that a case, because we are sure that by the time with an office with such agency has brought a case to court, the absolute knowledge is that they have done the due diligence to get to this point where a charge sheet has been formed, right? So by the time we then see you pulling a case, we say, This one, politically motivated. This one, somebody must have seen somebody. But now what you're saying then, you have, because the law is the law, you have no choice but to pull a case because the evidence then you have before a magistrate or a judicial officer does not meet the threshold. Is that what we're saying?
That's exactly what we are saying, and that's part of the power of the DPP is to review cases continually. And so as a prosecutor, when I'm in court and something like that happens, I go back and I tell the DPP, I say, I think this case is not going like we thought it was going to go. And, if we continue with a case where the witnesses are clearly saying, for instance, whatever we've charged did not happen, if we proceed with that case all the way to the end, the people are acquitted, they'll sue the government. They'll say we were prosecuted maliciously. And so then we are losing more money. So it's our job to review it constantly. Sometimes you thought there's something that you thought or you understood it a particular way. And when the witnesses come to court, you say, that's not what was reflected in the witness statements. That's not how the case was formulated. And so what do? I go back and we say, let's review this. Do we really have enough evidence to sustain a charge and to result in conviction? And that's what our mandate is. It's not just a strong suspicion. It has to be that we are sure that this case will result in a conviction.
You know what I'm hearing? That you're saying one of the greatest challenges that you face as a prosecutor who's taking a case through the process is the dishonesty of the human beings who come out initially to say, I will be a witness. And then they change their testimony or they change their mind at some point in this process. The question is why? Why do they change their minds? Do they actually change their minds? Or was this set out to end up the way it's ending up, ab initio?
I don't think it happens at the beginning of the case. I think that things change in the course of trial. And sometimes it's things like, for instance, let me take the example of I work at ODPP.
Yes.
And I record a statement because an offense has happened at the ODPP.
Yeah.
Now, in the course of this case ongoing, I have to deal with my colleagues who are like, oh, Annette is the witness who's testifying against Jane. And so there's an internal battle that you're fighting. You're like, is it worth bringing down the life of my colleague? Because this means you're going to be fired. You're not going to get your pension benefits. When I look at this individual, I'm like, oh, they have a family. What's happening with their children? Because once you're a public officer and you're charged, you're immediately sent on suspension.
Yep.
You get half of your salary. So sometimes you just feel, is it really worth it? And I think that's really what we are talking about this year.
That should be the exception and not the norm, where somebody gets there and something tells them, an angel visits them in the middle of the night and tells them, you know what, the children of this person who is stealing from the public and who's bringing your own office into disrepute are going to suffer. That should be the exception. It cannot be that's the norm, because I work in this office. Unless you're saying that I was forced to be a witness in the first place, I was forced or I was coerced to write a statement because this crime has happened in this department. Members of this department, you either testify or ama tukuongeze kwa hii list. So you opt at that point to avoid getting into the list. You say, okay, I'll tell you what I know. And then you realize there's no motivation at all in terms of even your own moral values to stand by the word that you're saying, that I sat here and I saw these officers colluding to abuse office, colluding to steal from the public. If you don't have that moral fiber in you, then you'll change your mind. But if you have moral fiber in you, you will stick the cause, unless you are coerced in the first place.
In fact, I think you said two very important things. There's a perception out there that anti-corruption cases don't go anywhere. And indeed, for me, I would say these cases that we are talking about are not the norm, they're the exception. What happens is that corruption trials are long and boring. We sit there perusing document after document after document, and it's not exciting for members of the public to follow. It's not reported as much because there's not much to talk about. And so what happens is that we forget. It's exciting when you hear, oh, this MP or this governor was arrested, but then it takes 4 years for us to go through the process just because it's the process. Taking evidence takes a long time. We have a number of witnesses, and proving corruption cases, it's a very high threshold. And so people feel, no, there are so many people being acquitted, but that's not the position. There's a lot of convictions that are happening from corruption cases. And so the few cases where there's been a withdrawal or a review of charges against some accused persons, now that pops up in the media and it's like, oh no, we are losing this fight. But for me, I don't believe that. I think that we are doing well. I think that we are heading in the right direction. But the second thing that I wanted to say is this year we are talking about being united against corruption. And we have to realize that each of us has a role to play. If I leave the ODPP, I get another job, for instance, and tomorrow I'm called that this happened while you were at the ODPP, come and testify. I shouldn't say that that's no longer my business. I should be like, no, it's my duty as a citizen of this country to make sure that things are going well. And anybody who's not upholding the law needs to be brought to book. So it's inconvenient sometimes. It's expensive because maybe I no longer live in Nairobi. I might be living in Mombasa. I might be living in Egypt. And I'm being asked, travel back and come and testify, or make arrangements and testify.
Yeah.
We have to inconvenience ourselves. We have to wake up and say, if I don't fight, nobody else will fight. We want to say, we think that let's let the EACC work, but the EACC cannot work if individuals don't get out of their comfort zones and report the things they are seeing in their offices. Many times, that your procurement officer is not following the procedures. These tenders are consistently being issued to one company, but we are quiet. Why are we quiet? We have means and ways for anonymous reporting. You don't even need to come and say, I'm the one reporting. Just send an email. And let it be, and let the investigative agencies take it from there.
Our guest is Annette Wangia. She's a senior principal prosecution counsel at the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, ahead of the International Anti-Corruption Day 2023, taking stock of the fight against corruption in this country for the last 20 years since the ratification of the convention, UN Convention on the fight against corruption. So, Annette, you were telling us the work that the ODPP does in taking these cases through the prosecution process and the challenges that you face. And you, as we were going to the break, you said, we actually have made a lot of progress. We are making very many strides. We are getting very many convictions going through the courts. Really?
Absolutely.
In corruption cases?
Absolutely.
In this country of ours?
Indeed.
For example?
So I know that.
So caveat, Eric is looking for the names of people that we know whose names have gone through the system and have been charged.
Blood on the street.
Yeah, blood and guts spilled on the street. Yeah. Not the people that we don't know about.
Give me a moment. I'll get back to you on the exact names.
Okay.
But indeed, we are getting convictions, and not only are we getting convictions, Eric. Now, one of the things that is happening is that, it's not enough for us to have someone in jail. It's because when they're in jail, they're still costing us money.
Yeah.
What we want is that when someone has
kill them.
No, okay. We are not killing them.
Okay.
We are. We want the money to come back to the institutions. We want the money to go to do the jobs that they're supposed to do. If a road was supposed to be built, let's have that road built. If a hospital, a school, let the money go there. And so we are really making a lot of efforts towards following the money. And so we do that in two ways. One, we go through the court system, and we've talked about that's a long and complicated process, that we have to come to the end, and at the end of that period, we say, okay, you've been found guilty. We expect you to pay us back 2 billion shillings.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with that is that in the 5 years it has taken us to convict, the money has gone. It's dissipated. And so one of the first things we are doing is freezing of assets. As soon as we say, there's something fishy happening here, there's some money that has suddenly appeared in your bank accounts, let's freeze these assets as we investigate. So the EACC is empowered to investigate. Basically, you cannot explain. You cannot explain why you have the amount of money or assets that you have versus your income. So if we look at your employment, maybe the businesses that you run, it's not commensurate with the money that you're holding. And so we go to court and we tell the court, look, the EACC has investigated and has established that you have more money than your assets, than your income.
Sources of income.
Exactly. So could you explain to us where you've gotten this money from? And the truth is that often that money is proceeds of crime. You know, my cousin was in a business or is employed, and we put together this business, and because they know the accounts are likely to be investigated, they tell me, oh, just hold this money for now, or let's register something in your name, let's buy land or cars or something. And so it's a civil procedure that doesn't go through the long criminal process. And yet we get the same end goal. If you cannot explain to us, then the court says, okay, your explanation is not sufficient. So the initial burden is on the investigator, the EACC, to establish, is there really sufficient case? And then we come to court and the burden shifts to the person who's being investigated, and they are told to explain. And in those cases, we are getting a lot of money back into the system, because it's just, you cannot explain it, then let's get the money back. And it's paid back to, if it was Migori County or Kiambu County, the money goes back there.
Tick.
Yes.
That is civil. ODPP is criminal.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, but the ODPP is where we see cases going, and they're not ending up with. So if somebody has been told return 100 million, 2 billion shillings, see, that's big money. That's a big profile person. They've been forced to relinquish all these assets, forfeit them back to the state. Sour. The Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is charged with making sure that there is criminal prosecution and conviction for the crime that the person has committed.
Yes.
On those ones.
Then
what happens?
And that's the one that I'm talking about. So I know this was a little bit back, but it's something that we are still fighting even in the High Court. You recall that I think it was last year, we had a conviction on the NSSF case where people were fined 2.4 billion. Now, what we are saying is that once we have identified your assets, we go to court and we say, the court is like, no, the ODPP proved its case. It's proved its case that this money left public accounts and went into a private area, and, it wasn't well done. Then we need this money to come back. So we go after your assets because of that. And we're like, okay, sell these properties and let's get the money back. And in the meantime, the people who are charged in those cases, they're still in jail. Because if you don't give us the money, then you're not going home. So they were sentenced to between 8 and 12 years each, and they're still in jail, because really, like we said, for us it's even more important that we get the money back rather than having you in jail. And we have many cases that we've gotten convictions. Some are not as large, but do not reach those high amounts of billions, but for us we feel every conviction is a victory. Because let's talk about the convictions that we get from police officers who are collecting bribes on the road. It may not seem so. An officer is arrested, and at the time of arrest on that date, he has collected 10,000 shillings. What we are saying is that the reason we get this person off of the roads is that as at 11 a.m. you have 10,000. How much money do you have at the end of the day? How much money have you collected at the end of the month, at the end of the year? So it's a consistent collection, a consistent seeping of funds that should be going towards other purposes and building the nation. But this individual is collecting money for himself and for his own private benefit. And so we are saying, let's remove you from your office. You're unsuitable to serve in this office of the police. Let's get someone in this place who will do a better job than what you're doing.
Is there, because you talk about agencies and support that comes across, in the fight against corruption, the war on graft, to say let's move a little bit, further along in terms of these cases, is there complete cooperation and cohesion amongst the bodies that are tasked to fight graft? ODPP, EACC, DCI. We've seen the fights that have happened, or rather, the tension that has been between the ODPP and the DCI, for example. How then can you ensure that the war on graft continues in a forward trajectory if there's always DCI said, ODPP said, I didn't do? I don't want to say he said, she said, but I don't know who would be the he and the she. But okay, ODPP said and DCI said or didn't say. Can you really then say we're making strides if agencies that are tasked with this crucial work sometimes don't agree?
I would say that we're making strides. I think that tension in every relationship, in every working relationship, there's always going to be tension. Sometimes there's difference of opinion. One institution feels, no, this is the way we should go, and that the other institution says, no, I don't think we should go in this way. And I think that that's why the Constitution gives everybody their job. The EACC is mandated to do ethics and anti-corruption. The National Police Service have a larger mandate of handling all sorts of crimes, maintaining law and order and so on. And the ODPP has the job to prosecute. The judiciary has the job to make a decision between, the people who've been charged, the people who are saying, no, you've committed an offense. So for us, we say, and I think that the courts have agreed with us over the years, that the ODPP should focus on prosecution. We should not overstep and start dictating, for instance, how the EACC should conduct its ethics education. And the National Police should not say, no, I think this person should be charged. I think that the ODPP has made a mistake. And maybe we may make a mistake here and there, and there's a procedure for that. If you think the ODPP did not charge someone who ought to have been charged or charge someone who ought not have been charged, let's go to the High Court. And the High Court has the job of determining, did the ODPP do the wrong thing? And if we feel the police have not done the right thing, we also go to the High Court and say, we think that the DCI is not doing the job that he should be doing. And an impartial arbiter makes that choice. But if we begin to have infighting amongst us, we're not going to do the job that the people have asked us to do.
However, you should not even trust each other so much. Like we've seen recently, it's because of over-trusting one another that cases have collapsed recently in court. Because the DPP trusted that the DCI was going to follow up this case as it's going on with further evidence, with further information, and then you realize that the person who was supposed to come and give you further information moved on. They are now in Malindi, enjoying and basking under the sun.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I think that there are times when a case has, there's a lot of, I don't want to say pressure, but you can see that a crime has been committed, and you can see that I have maybe 80% of my evidence or 90, and I'm saying, do I want to wait? Maybe as I wait, I'm going to lose my evidence. My witnesses are going to be interfered with before we go to court. And you say, let's go to court. And we've seen that sometimes that comes and bites us because we thought that we were going to be able to cover this 10%. And you know that for the court to convict someone, it's beyond reasonable doubt. And so if we don't get to that point before we charge, then the court is like, you did not prove beyond reasonable doubt. You didn't prove to the required standard. And so we agree absolutely as the ODPP. We say, no, let us make sure that we have watertight evidence as much as it is within our control. There are things that happen that are outside of our control. Sometimes we even feel, oh, no, the court did not understand our case. The court made a wrong decision. Like the witnesses came to court, the documents were produced, everything went well according to the investigative agencies and the ODPP. But when the court comes back, the court says, oh no, you did not prove it to the required standard. And when we feel, for instance, the magistrate's court made that mistake, we go to the High Court. And when we feel the High Court made a mistake, we go to the Court of Appeal. And I think that using the mechanisms that have been put in place, it's very effective. And I think that we should do that.
According to the Constitution, you're independent.
Yes.
The Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is independent. Vituko ground, are you independent?
We are independent.
To what extent?
So we are independent with regard to making the decision to charge and the execution of our mandate. Of course, we are not an island, so we have to be funded by government. Our operations administratively is coordinated and connected to the government, but in how we do our work, we are independent.
So you don't get any political pressure to commence or drop cases?
No, because in the end, as the ODPP, we have to take accountability for the decisions that we make. If, let me take the example of where we have political pressure, for instance, to charge. And we charge someone and we don't have the evidence. When that person is acquitted in the end, we have to go to the civil court where they tell us, no, this prosecution was malicious. And we have to defend ourselves. And so if we are constantly charging because of political pressure, then our value or our stance in society, people are like, oh, you can't trust the ODPP. They don't really do what they need, what they need to be done.
Do you think recent happenings have done exactly what you're saying? Dented the confidence of the public in the capacity of the ODPP to actually prosecute anti-corruption cases?
Yes, I think that just because we had a number of significant cases that did not come to conclusion, that the public, they're like, but are you really serious? Are you really doing what we expect you to do? And for us, we say, don't let this recent happenings make you question the value of the work that we are doing. We really are doing a lot of work. There might be a number of cases, a couple of cases here and there that did not end up in convictions or that were withdrawn before we got to the end, but the work is still going on. Yeah.
So, you talk about unity in the war against graft, and that's the theme that we're looking at when, this day is commemorated tomorrow and then going into the future after 20 years of fighting graft. Unity by whom?
By all of us. So we are talking about, we've talked about the institutions. So we are saying that the EACC needs to work with the ODPP. The ODPP needs to work with the judiciary. The judiciary needs to work with the prison system. The prison systems need to work with the police. So we are all working together as government. But more than that, this year, we are calling on the public. We are saying that the responsibility of fighting corruption starts with us. If we as individuals make the right choices, then we won't be having as many corruption cases as we are having. Right now, we are talking about students going to Form 1. I think selection is due to happen any moment. You want your child to go to a school that they don't have sufficient marks. They haven't qualified to go to that school. But you excuse yourself, no, but it's my baby. I want them to have the best. But who tells you that the person who qualified to that school doesn't want their child to have the best? Maybe they don't have the money to pay that principal to admit their child. So because they don't have it, when they come, they're told, oh, the slots are full. Your child can't come to this school. When we talk about, let's talk about traffic offenses that many of us are guilty of. I'm running late to a meeting, and so let me drive a little bit on the pavement. Let me overlap everyone else.
Just a little bit.
It's just for today. But is it really just for today? Don't think of corruption as the governor who's stealing 5 billion. Corruption starts with you and I. It starts with failure to adhere to the conditions that have been set in your office. If you're an accounting officer in an institution and you're being told, no, I need this tender to go to, my sister's child, or I need this procurement process to be skewed in this way, it's up to you to say, no, I don't want to participate. And if each of us stands up and says no, then we'll make a difference. Let's not be running, because you see what we are doing as institutions for many years, we are running after the horse that has bolted.
That's true.
But let's keep the horse in its
stable.
And I think we all as a country understand that, Annette. And what you're talking about is impunity. By the time impunity gets here, it's because impunity is the absence of accountability that just continues fueling impunity. We all understand that there's been a breakdown in law and order in very many instances. We create these institutions that, one, let us have cohesion in this country. All right, let's look at one another and avoid escalating issues within communities. So we create an institution that will address that. Another one that will address not just corruption, but ethics. That's going into our moral values. We create that. We even put a chapter in the Constitution that will talk about our values and ethics. We create an office of the DPP and we say, this one, we shall make it independent. The holder of this office shall not take direction from any human being, animal, or stone, and all those things to shield it. So that those institutions help to bring accountability, fight impunity, as they are also educating us and bringing the issue of values and morals back to us. Now, when we don't see impunity being fought, then there's no incentive to stop doing what you're doing. If you don't see impunity being fought, then if nobody gets punished for jumping the light and they go and they leave you and then you go and find traffic ahead, then you feel, so what was the point of me just standing at the lights?
Yeah.
So now the institution that you belong to, the ODPP, has the big task of taking prosecution cases to court with sufficient evidence, while at the same time making sure that you're protecting the rights of everybody, including the accused. So when you go now publicly and you say, you know what, we have sufficient evidence against Ndu. Ndu colluded, did this with the other. And I have directed the police to arrest Ndu and take the Ndu to court tomorrow. Public drama and all. And then that case collapses. You have not upheld the right of the citizens because there is no accountability. And you've not upheld the right of Ndu, whose children have been arrested at the gate of their home or in their house in the middle of the night.
I agree with you. I think we bear a very heavy load, and we are cognizant of that as the ODPP, that the decisions that we make have far-reaching consequences. That, like you said, that the people of Kenya say, oh, we put you in place to do this work and you're not doing it. And many times the people who are accused, when, the case goes on, even if it goes on for a year, that's a year, when you didn't come to work regularly, nothing else is happening, you're not sleeping well, your family is stressed and so on. So we are cognizant of that responsibility, and we are cognizant of the fact that we need to protect public resources. And so I don't think that any decision is made lightly. That when you see someone being arrested, it's not done for the drama. It's not done because we want a public show. Because as at that point, the person making that decision, who's the DPP, is of the heavy view that there is sufficient evidence. That later on, unfortunately, something might turn up and that decision, the information that he had at that time was not accurate. And so even when that case is being withdrawn, it's not being withdrawn lightly. There's a lot of conversations and a lot of decisions that have to be made to see if we have a gap. Is this a gap that can be filled? And many times we even go back to court and say, listen, we've realized that we have a big gap here, that if this gap is not covered, then we won't end up in a conviction. And many times the court tells us, go back, you have this new evidence, let's supply this new evidence, give the defense time to peruse the evidence, and let's proceed with the case. So it's not that in every instance where we realize there's a gap, we withdraw. Sometimes it can be filled, but there are times it can't be filled. There are times that we have to accept and fall on our sword and say, no, this decision was the right decision at the time, but at this point, it's not the right decision. And so that we don't cause further injustice, we are asking to stop the case at this point.
Are high-profile cases harder to adjudicate than the lower ones? Because, again, public perception, which many could argue is perception and not the case, but public perception, just as importantly, would be that it's easier to go after somebody who's lower in profile or status than somebody else. And that's why we see that it's quick to say, okay, you earn 50,000 shillings, but you have property worth 350 million. It's not possible. Let's go after you. If we saw the same thing happening with a governor or a member of parliament, it would be more difficult to go after that person. Why would that perception be formed?
So It is a little more difficult because of the opportunities and privileges that higher profile individuals have. So for instance, if I'm an accountant at a lower level accountant, for instance, with government, if I have some extra money, where am I keeping my extra money? Probably I bought a shamba back home. You know, I've bought my wife a new car. Sometimes I've bought a new car that even your colleagues are like, ume afford aje hiyo gari. But if we're talking about this person, they leave the country and go to Jersey Island and open a company there and deposit the money there, or to another country, and so the how the money is hidden is a little more complex. And so for us to realize, you have unexplained assets, we have to have a lot of bilateral agreements. We have to do a lot of mutual legal assistance. Some countries, we don't even have those agreements with them. And, you try to get there and they're like, yeah, we can't help you. You just sort yourselves out in your country. Us guys, our lives are continuing well. And again, we are fighting. Many times we are developing country fighting, dealing with very developed countries, and some countries are, they're just unwilling to cooperate with us to pursue those assets. So sometimes that is the case. So and it's the same. It's really the example that people talk about, mwizi wa kuku. Mwizi wa kuku is easy. First of all, even your neighbors are like, but we unanga kuku. They are willing to come and testify.
Is hanging out of your mouth.
It's already hanging over your mouth. Versus this other person who they can even, I have an accountant who cover my tracks. I have company upon company that the money moves here, and we have shell companies that I even have a location. So when we start investigating, you're like, but is this really corrupt money or is it genuine money? So it is a little more difficult. And even when we come to court, we talk about how many lawyers are you showing up with? We've seen some cases where plea starts in the morning, and in the evening we have not even gotten to the last lawyer because someone showed up with 10 lawyers. So it is a little bit more complicated for the higher profile cases.
International Anti-Corruption Day will be commemorated tomorrow. And that's the reason why we had Annette Wangia, Senior Principal Prosecution Counsel in the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, as our guest today. Where is it taking place tomorrow?
We're in Murang'a, at Murang'a University, and we're asking everybody in Murang'a to turn up. I think it's a moment for us to pause, to look at where have we come from and what else can we do, and we'll be having very interesting conversations there.
Asante sana.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.